Hi everyone, welcome back to my Elden Ring series where I make a build for every melee weapon in the game. In this episode, I'll be covering the Sword of St. Trina. This weapon is a straight sword that requires 10 strength, 12 dexterity, and 14 intelligence to wield and inflicts the sleep status effect. It scales primarily with dexterity followed by strength and intelligence. This weapon can be acquired in a chest at the base of the Forsaken Ruins in Caelid. It comes with a unique weapon skill called Mists of Slumber, which coats our sword with sleep essence and releases a mist of sleep. For this episode, I just had to go for a sleep-focused build, and I'm power stancing the Sword of St. Trina in my main hand with the Velvet Sword of St. Trina from the DLC in my other hand. Both of these weapons natively inflict the sleep status effect and have nearly identical scaling, so they pair well together. Unfortunately, sleep is a very niche and peculiar status effect, as there are very few enemies that can actually be affected by it in a meaningful way, and even fewer sources for inflicting it. There are a few enemies that when afflicted by sleep basically become completely free kills, for example the Godskin Nobles and Apostles and Rune Bears, but other than that it is by far the weakest status effect in the game. But with all that said, it is definitely still a fun status effect to experiment with, and I would recommend trying out a sleep build at least once if you haven't before. The focus of my playstyle is to apply sleep as quickly and as often as possible to any enemies that can be affected by it. To accomplish this, I usually start off fights by using the Mists of Slumber skill, and then I just go to town with the Power Stance Straight Sword moveset, which as I've mentioned in previous videos, is quite good for hitting multiple times in succession. Now I will mention that the Velvet Sword of St. Trina in our offhand actually applies a different type of sleep called Eternal Sleep, which is essentially just a better version of the basic sleep. This actually works to our benefit because both types share the same status bar, so they can each contribute to each other. I believe the way it works is that whichever type of sleep hits last before the bar is filled determines what the enemy will actually be afflicted with. That means we can kind of cheat and sometimes get lucky with the proc of Eternal Sleep, even though our main weapon only inflicts regular sleep. When we are fighting enemies that are immune to sleep, this build essentially just gets reduced to a basic power stance straight sword build, but it's definitely still viable. For my stats, at level 150, I have 60 Vigor, 10 Mind, 30 Endurance, 45 Strength, 50 Dexterity, 14 Intelligence, and 10 Faith and Arcane. We have a high health pool with 60 Vigor, which is definitely helpful because our armor is not the most protective. Mind is not very important at all, because our weapon skill is essentially just a buff that we don't need to use that often. Endurance is definitely important for this build because we want a lot of stamina to be able to play aggressively, and when enemies become afflicted with sleep, we want to keep up the pressure even more to do as much damage as possible before they wake up. As for our damage stats, this is effectively a quality build because that gives us the best scaling with our sword. We do have a little bit better scaling and dexterity, so I have a few more points in that compared to strength. The intelligence scaling on this weapon is pretty weak, so I only went up to the minimum requirement to wield it. For my armor, I wanted to make my character look like a sort of ethereal, dreamy warrior to fit the theme of the sleep build. I think that the Nox armor sets encompass this aesthetic pretty well with lots of flowy white fabrics. I'm using the Night Maiden Twin Crown, the Nox Swordstress armor, and the Nox bracelets and greaves. Moving on to Talismans, I first of all have the St. Trina Smile, which gives us a damage boost after triggering sleep. This is a must-have for this build and is really the only piece of equipment that synergizes with sleep. Next, I have Millicent's Prosthesis, which gives us a damage boost after successive attacks, as well as 5 extra points in dexterity, bringing us to a total of 55. I ended up getting a lot of utility out of this one, because once enemies are put to sleep, we can rack up tons and tons of consecutive hits to melt their health bars even quicker. Next is the Erdtree's Favor plus 2 variant, which gives us an all-around increase to our health, stamina, and equip load, which is always nice. And finally, I have the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman for increased stamina regeneration. For the Flask of Wondrous Physic, I'm using the Green Burst Crystal tier for even more stamina regeneration, and the Opaline Hard tier for more defense. And that is all I have for this Sword of St. Trina sleep build video. Here is an overview of my setup. Thank you for watching, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.